Please give it up for Andy Raskin.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. The other day, I'm walking in the Mission, and I see this sign in front of this Indian restaurant. And what I love about it is that it really embodies an approach to telling the story, to strategic messaging that I think most companies follow. There's a list of products, solutions to problems, and then there's a bunch of reasons under this "Why the hell should I come in?" title that's about why these solutions are better than similar ones that you might find elsewhere. They're starting with why, but it's really why us. It's very self-centered. It's like, here's how we solve your problem, and here's how we're better than the others. And this seems like a reasonable approach. I mean, we all do have competitors, after all. And maybe it worked back when markets had few enough players that buyers could ignore the bluster and sort through all the claims. But that's not what markets look like today. I mean, each of you probably competes not against a handful of competitors, but dozens, all screaming, "Why us?" at customers. I think this is why about a year ago, David Cancel posted this, that product differentiation is going away. The question, of course, is, what do you mean by act accordingly? And what does that mean for the rest of us? A few years ago, I began to write posts about a totally different approach to telling the story that I saw the most successful companies adopting, the ones like Drift that seem to be breaking out of the clutter to achieve what you might call brand differentiation. The most well-read one of these has been this one about Zuora. As many of you know, Zuora, their platform is for running a subscription business. They recently had a successful IPO, but the way they tell the story hasn't really changed much since they were actually much smaller. It always starts with some version of this. We are now in a subscription economy. This is not why us. It's a story about change, about how consumers used to want to own things, but increasingly want the benefits of those things without the hassle of the ownership. And it celebrates those who are quick to jump on, adapt to this shift, and who have won. It creates a bit of FOMO this way. This is not why us. It's not about Zuora at all. This is why you. And specifically, it's why you now. Now, I think we can go overboard in saying that the company's story, the pitch, should be like a movie. We are not writing a 3-act screenplay here, after all. But there is this moment in many films that can teach us a lot about selling to a reluctant buyer. When we first meet Luke, he's belly aching about how he's bored, he wants adventure, he wants to go be a pilot. He sounds like a very eager buyer for lightsabers and the Force. So Obi-Wan shows up and he gives him the why us. He shows him the product, lets him demo it, drops a little differentiation. Hey, I knew your dad. And, what does Luke say? He says, sounds great, but I really got to get home. I can't get involved in that. Who does this remind you of? Yeah, your reluctant buyer. On the scale of horrible miserableness to utter joy, Luke and most of the people you're selling to, for all their complaining, they're actually doing okay. I mean, we say sell to pain, but they're probably not really in pain. They have ups and downs, but they assume life is always going to be okay. This is the definition of a buyer who sees no urgency, who is not emotionally engaged. So how does a director or your team change that? Well, in Star Wars, Luke is presented with a big change in the world. The Empire kills his family. Now he sees that there are stakes. He'll probably wind up dead, but if he follows Obi-Wan, he has this chance at winning and thriving. Obi-Wan even defines the criterion for happily ever after, what I like to call the promised land. Luke has to destroy that Death Star. For Zora customers, happily ever after can be yours if you can turn your customers into subscribers. Now, the formula, the structure of the Why You Now story, or what I call the promised land pitch, is actually really simple. You name the shift, this epochal shift. You show how this shift creates some huge opportunity and existential threat, basically winners and losers. And we name this, we tease this promised land, the goal state, that if our customers can get there, then it's happily ever after. It's been incredibly rewarding and gratifying to hear from people all over the world who have read that Zora post and some others that I've written, who have adopted this formula and told me how valuable it's been for them. Someone backstage has told me that they revamped their pitch based on it, one of the speakers coming later. But I've also seen it done really badly. Many people have also emailed me, hey, I tried this, didn't work. And when I ask, usually, like 9 times out of 10, they've basically taken the Zora deck and then pasted their own logo and words into that deck. And then, just like a great movie has its own flow, you want to follow principles, not fill in templates. And so I'd like to share with you some of the narratives that I've helped teams build with this framework to give you a sense of how some of the variations can happen in the real world. Logical has raised around $39 million for its platform that helps legal teams sort through and categorize documents and data, what's called the discovery phase of a lot of legal proceedings. And when Andy contacted me, he said, we have a mission statement, but it's all about why us. Can you help us frame the urgency from the customer point of view? So he wasn't saying why you, he didn't use the language why you now, but he's basically asking for that. I like to start off by training the leadership team on this framework, but then quickly talk to customers. And we spoke to a lot of logical customers, and we asked them a lot of questions, but the biggie was this one. How is having logical more valuable for you now? What has changed in the world such that having it now is makes it more valuable than it would have been to have it even just a few years ago? And we heard this very consistent story that, hey, from the people who do this discovery work, hey, I used to, have to scan boxes and boxes of documents, and that was tough. But now, the number of data sources as well as the volume has skyrocketed. So we're literally having, data from things like drones and cars that now has to be considered in discovery proceedings. Data that's coming from things in your home. Data from, of course, the cloud, all the documents we're creating, all the emails, all the conversations, all the chats that someone's ever done in their entire life. So Andy and his leadership team summed up the shift this way. Now everything is discoverable. This is a huge change for the people who do this work. How does it give rise to an existential threat or a huge opportunity? Well, the deadlines haven't changed, so you either fail miserably or look like a star. Andy's co-founder at Logical is really into heavy metal, and so he argued very hard for this slide next. And I was a little, really? But actually, Andy says the reaction to this is priceless. The reason we're telling the story this way is not to educate. It's not even to challenge. It's to get emotional confirmation from the buyer that we understand their story. Andy says prospects see this slide and they say, oh yeah, that's me. Or that's my colleague Jane on every Friday afternoon. And then the promised land. So, we at Logical asked, what if discovery could be instant, no matter how big a pile of data that you're dealing with? Andy credits this narrative with helping him close his Series B earlier this year, and he says it's even helped in recruiting. One thing I found fascinating is that, like a lot of companies, one of his biggest challenges is getting new reps up to speed as they scale. And Andy measures time to first win. So it's the time it takes for a new rep when they join the company to their first closed deal. And Andy says this narrative has slashed that by over 50% from around 60 days to under 30 days. Give you another look at this framework. So Zaius, which has raised over $50 million, competes in that very crowded marketing technology landscape slide we saw earlier. And sure enough, when I met Mark, he told me that differentiation was his biggest challenge. He and his salespeople would do their pitch, and people would ask, so how are you different from X, Y, and Z? It would always happen. And so Zaius has a lot of happy customers, mostly B2C marketers. And so again, we asked this question, what has changed in your world such that having Zaius is more valuable now than it would have even been a few years ago? And over again, we heard this. One woman, a B2C marketer who uses Zaius, literally said this almost verbatim. We heard that it used to be that it was okay if you pulled like the same two or three levers to kind of goose repeat purchase. They kind of worked, and there wasn't that much else you could do. But now that's not good enough anymore, in part because of Amazon, in part because there's just so many more touch points, so many more levers at a marketer's disposal. So what's the promised land? Now, this is controversial on Mark's team. Some more people were like, do marketers really want to be engineers and scientists? But when we look back at the interviews, what they were saying, and I think we even heard that from some of the CMOs earlier today, is that yes, we realize to be successful, we got to be doing experiments. I'll say more about this story before I'm done today, but as soon as Mark's team began telling this story, which was pretty recently, they tell me that these "how are you different from X" questions just went away. Collective Health has raised over $250 million for its platform that lets employers deliver a great healthcare experience to their employees. I trained Allie and Sarah Jane goes by SJ on my framework, and it was SJ who really ran with it. She is the one who talked to customers, and the thing she heard over and over again, especially from C-suite execs, was that enterprises had taken over more and more of the functions that health insurance companies typically performed. I always thought that your company pays the premium, and then if your people get sicker than usual, then the insurance company bears that risk. Well, it turns out that more and more companies, especially larger ones, are bearing that risk themselves, so that the health insurance companies, increasingly are really just their doctor network. So one day I'm driving down 101, and I see this. And I might have added now to now every CEO to kind of stress the shift, but that's a quibble. SJ tells me that her sales team literally gets leads from CEOs who are driving down like the highway like I was, who say, yes, this is happening to me, let's talk. Of course, the real benefits don't come from the sales or a billboard. From a sales deck or a billboard. They come from the entire company really committing to this promised land narrative. And when that happens, you see a bunch of really great things happening that I think are really the keys to kind of this hypergrowth thing. You see, first of all, everyone rallying around one mission, not some self-centered mission of the company, but around the mission of getting customers to the promised land. I think you see that at Drift very, very clearly. You see that in this kind of promised land culture, when you do start talking about the product, it's always positioned as arms for the battle, not just a solution to some problem. I mentioned the Zayas story. So after setting up engineering repeat purchase as this kind of promised land, they ask, well, what's the monster that's blocking you from getting there? And for so many teams, they know because they've talked to these people, and they're in the space, it's that the marketing data and the campaign tools are separate in separate systems, and makes it almost impossible for these B2C marketers to do the kind of experiments they want to do. So of course, all of Zayas' features are aimed at slaying this monster. Mark Galley told me that this is the slide where his sales teams, when they're in conversations with the prospects, get the nods, the yeah, where they really understand how Zayas is different. Which is funny, they're not saying here's how we're different, they're telling the story and they're getting that result. The most telling sign of this kind of promised land culture is that the thing you're selling ultimately is not solution to problem, but you're selling belonging. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs, after the physiological ones and the safety, belonging is the most fundamental. And the promised land narrative is really an invitation to join others who want to reach it. The great brands have always known this. For them, purchase is not solving a problem, first and foremost. It's joining a group of people, a movement that shares a belief. Of course, the great magazines, too. Every story, every issue is really is all organized about how we're going to help this reader get to the promised land. Last week or a couple weeks ago when Drift were in Hypergrowth, the version of this event in Boston, Dave Gerhardt offered to pick up attendees at the airport. And I think this is not just going above and beyond, which it is, it's also telling the Drift story about being there for customers now, which we're going to hear about over and over again from them. A few years ago, Ben Horowitz, partner at Andreessen Horowitz, made this very astute observation that if you have a muddled story, you have a muddled strategy. That the story is the strategy. There's so many implications of this, that the story is not first and foremost a marketing responsibility, but I think of CEO responsibility. But also that, if you're telling a why us story, here's how we're different, here's how we're great, no matter how much you're saying you're customer-centric, you're really not. Could a restaurant tell a promised land story? So I was born in Brooklyn, grew up there, and you live in San Francisco long enough, you really give up on finding great pizza. But one day, a few years ago, someone told me that there was this new place in the Mission where it was pretty good, and it reminded him of he was also from back east, and reminded him of that pizza we had. And so I tried it, and it actually was really great. And like the fourth or fifth time I went there, I looked up at the menu board, and I noticed right at the top there is essentially like a promised land message. And if they had asked me, how have we changed your life, which is actually another question I like to ask customers when we're building the story, I think I would have said something like this. I would have said, in this world in which I had given up faith, that he restored my faith again. The owner of this restaurant, by the way, his name is Tom, he told me that this came to him in a dream, and that he's only barely begun to execute on this, that he's delivered a tiny fraction of this. And this actually gets to the other benefit of telling the story this way, which is that the story is not about the product. Product is hugely important, and he's very serious about it. But ultimately, it's not about that. And people are, if you can show them the light, show them that goal, and they say, yes, I want to get in there, I want to get that, then they're more likely to come along with you on the product journey. So my invitation to you today is maybe see what happens when you stop telling the story as why us, and instead start talking about why you now. Instead, be like Moana's grandma. Talk about what has changed such that your customer must let loose of the status quo, ignore the taboo, sail beyond the reef. Sorry for the Moana spoilers, anyone. Because the future of the tribe depends on it. If you do give this a try, or if you're interested in reading more about this stuff, I write about it a lot on LinkedIn and Medium. I invite you to connect with me. And like I said, if you do give it a try, I'd really like to hear how it goes. Thank you very much.